Welcome to Math Sprinkles. And if you haven't had your afternoon sugar intake, you'll want it nearby for this webinar because the slides are so yummy. Thank you, Lindsey. Now we need to introduce Lindsey Pust, who's our numeracy coordinator and special projects for Atlas, who's going to sprinkle all the mathy goodness on us this afternoon. Go ahead, Lindsey.
Thank you. Yes, welcome. And thank you for being here. I'm excited for Math Sprinkles. We're actually, I'll go through the agenda and I'll go through objectives in a moment. We're going to literally jump right into an activity first. So in the chat, you will see a link to a slide, and it is going to look like this. So when you navigate there, you will see that there are text boxes up at the top. If you click on a text box, you will be able to erase that text and type your name. And you can just do first name and then pick any number and place it on the number line by dragging and dropping it. So I'll give you a moment to navigate to this slide via the link that's in the chat. I see people coming in. Pick any text box, type your name and any number, and drag it to fit on this number line at the bottom. And you can always edit your box. You can add a number next to your name. And if you finish, feel free to type another one. I'll give us another minute or two. I'm going to do a second. You do not need to do a second, but I am going to. All right. And on the number line, you'll see that the numbers are between 4 and 5. So if you want to change your number a little bit, you can. I was not clear at all when I didn't give you the parameters. Between 4 and 5, that's my bad. Oh, I see some people moving. Awesome. All right, this is looking good. Give you another minute or so. I see people still typing.
Lindsey, did you mean the number should be between 4 and 5?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I missed that entirely, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was not clear. Yes, so that it fits on this number line. All right, I'll give you another 30 seconds or so if you want to do another one or finish up the one you're working on already, and then we will come back to Zoom. We're going to resume. We're going to come back to this in a moment, but I wanted to give us a chance to do this first. Awesome, awesome. Okay, if you can make your way back to Zoom, you'll see then my slideshow. And I'm sorry, Katrina, it's not working for you. I'm just seeing that now in the chat. Do you want to type a number that you want and I can type it in for you? Oh, perfect. Oh, yeah. Okay, I see your name right there. Excellent. All right. So I am going to start. So thank you for doing that. That's kind of like pretend that was as we were coming in and as we're getting situated before class starts, we're writing our name on a Post-it and putting it on a number line. Or if it's a virtual class, we are doing exactly what we just did, writing your name in a text box and dragging it on a number line before class even starts. So now we will start and we're going to come back to that slide in just a little bit. My name is Lindsey Pust, like Patsy said, and I am the Atlas Numeracy and Special Projects Coordinator. And I have a special love for math. I was in the classroom for about 10 years teaching GED, pre-GED classes, and I was teaching all subjects, but I really developed a love for teaching math. I would say mostly because many individuals feel that they are not math people or that they can't do it or that there's anxiety about it or that it's not relevant or whatnot. Math was not my favorite subject in school, but it kind of became my favorite subject when I realized how much of a barrier it was for some people. And I just realized it didn't have to be. There was a lot more that people could do than they realized. So that started my journey of figuring out how math actually works instead of just memorizing things. So I'm excited to be with you today and to kind of talk about math routines that we can incorporate in any subject. It doesn't just have to be math class because numeracy is important in achieving goals for whatever that might be, and not just in math classes. So we're going to get to experience routines as a student. You just kind of started kind of coming in and putting a number on the number line. And I'm going to give you some time to think about and identify ways that the routines we see today can be adapted for your context. We all have different contexts. We're all have a different student population. So how we do it today may not work exactly as is for your students, and that's okay. So we're going to think through, how could I make this work? What pieces could I take? And then being able to network and collaborate with colleagues via the chat. We'll have one breakout room later today where you'll get to kind of talk with some other teachers. And so we hope that happens. The one thing before I go further, I would love if you could put in the chat, what program are you with? And or like, what is your context with working with students? Is it like one-on-one setting? Is it a computer class? Is it an English class? Is it in a volunteer capacity? Is it like what is your relationship with students and math? If I could just get a sense, if it's classroom based. One room online and in person. Oh, thank you. Yes, and the delivery online or in person. Substitute GED. Okay. Yep. Anybody else? Give you a moment to finish typing. Hello, Susan. I got to meet you last week in the cohort. The CCRS cohort. Awesome. Okay. Digital literacy teacher with Mountain View Schools. Teach Word, Excel, PowerPoint in person and over Zoom, and the Excel class gives me math challenges. Yes, for sure. English, I'm reading some of these because this is being recorded so that other people see kind of who was in the room. English for speakers of other languages, online at the moment. Use everyday math. Literacy Minnesota Open Door Learning Center Southside, the morning coordinator and beginning literacy teacher. Awesome. Central Minnesota in the St. Cloud area. You work with numeracy. Cynthia works with numeracy, classroom-based and math and adult diploma. Awesome. One-room schoolhouse. Okay. Awesome. Scottish context. Okay. So we have kind of a range here, and I love this. Range of learners, range of levels, range of delivery, modes of delivery of instruction, and types of classrooms. So thank you for letting me kind of know who's in the room. You will have many opportunities today to unmute. I'll ask for some of that sometimes, and also participating in the chat. So make sure your chat's open, because I will ask for some responses there. We're going to talk about this routine about taking attendance. You already did part of it. We're going to kind of finish talking about it, do the next step in just a moment. We're also going to talk about what are some mathy ways we could talk about the weather. And we'll talk about graphing and measures of central tendencies there. And then talking about graphic literacy and some slow reveal graphs. So some of these you may have incorporated or done in your settings already. My hope is that this conversation, though, is hopefully going to shed light on maybe different aspects of it and how we can be adapting it, and being aware of the reading, writing, speaking, listening that's also involved in some of these routines. So, but first, why mathy routines, especially if it's not a math class? Like, why take time to develop routines for our students, whether it's one-on-one or in a class? Why? What thoughts do you have on that? And I invite you to type in the chat or unmute. We can hear from a couple people if you do want to unmute. Why mathy routines, do you think? Why would we do that? Because math is part of adulting daily, so it should be part of school daily. Any other thoughts? I'll give you a moment to finish typing if you are. I think we need the structure to strengthen our math skills. We strengthen our language skills just by communicating in the world, but there aren't as many natural chances to math. Yeah, and I like that idea of like really carving out time to do that, right? To expose students for what they may need in the future. Yes, we don't know what goals, we don't know always the extent of the goals our students have. And so giving them, like, supporting access so that they can pursue careers that may involve more math knowledge and flexibility with numbers and decimals, percents, fractions, things like that. If supporting that by giving them a chance to kind of reason through it in a safe space, right? So that they can feel confident in pursuing those kinds of careers later on. We do have just a couple notes. We do have a Minnesota ABE statement regarding math instruction. So both literacy and numeracy are critical skills for adults in order to fully engage in their communities. English language arts and math skills for adult basic education are defined by the CCRS. To further define the work of adult numeracy instruction for ABE, and with the goal of achieving equitable math instruction for adult learners, and part of that is access, the Minnesota Numeracy Instruction Advisory Team holds that these things. And I'm going to give you a moment to read the screen on these bullet points. If you have trouble finding the screen, or not finding the screen, reading the screen, if it's not visible, I'm like, what is the word? Please put it in the chat so that I know. And you can private message if that makes you feel better as well. But I'll be quiet and give you a moment to read. Words that stand out to you. I want to throw them in the chat. One that stands out to me is access. Any other words? Growth. Or phrases. Cohesive. Rigorous. Every level, intentional. Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. And another one, as I'm looking at this, that stands out to me too, is being committed to professional growth, right? So it's a process, it's a journey, but it's intentional, right? So that is a statement that Minnesota Adult Education has regarding numeracy instruction. And I found these slides. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm actually going to highlight a few phrases from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, what they have to say about mathematical routines, right? So they really do enable all students to engage more fully in learning. They consistently maintain high expectations. It's a routine. I get used to it. I know what's happening. It gives structure. Someone already mentioned that. Gives structure to time and interactions. Students know what to expect. And I think one of the most important things about all of that is that then it opens up conversations and thinking about mathematics that might not happen by themselves. If I'm used to the routine and I'm not constantly learning the mechanics of it, then my mind eventually is able to more fully engage with the mathematics that is happening. And so it can open up conversations. So doing something routinely can be very helpful. The last thing that I want to mention and that we're going to be experiencing today is this, instead of I do, you do, we do, you do. Yeah, it's going to be you do, we do, I do, kind of backwards, where you give something to students, let them play with it, see what they can do, see what they understand, and then working together on something. And then as the teacher, I'm going to pull out from that work. I'm going to pull out things that I want to call attention to, whether it's misconceptions or whether it's mathematical, sound mathematical ideas that I want to call attention to. Then I can kind of take that conversation, but students have already worked with it, and then highlight some things. So giving students a chance to kind of jump in first. So back to the taking attendance, okay? I really did just ask you to jump in, right? So I put up a number line on a slide with some text boxes, and then you created your name and your number and you moved it to the appropriate spot on the number line. So now I'm going to ask if anybody would be willing to share what number if anybody would be willing to share how you chose your number and how you decided where to drag it. Is anybody willing to unmute? How did you choose? And I should be watching. You can put in the chat if you're willing to unmute, or you can just unmute and start talking. How did you choose your number? And how did you decide where to place it?
This is Azul. I can go. I chose 5. 1, because I like odd prime numbers. And then also because it was very easy to know exactly where to place it, more or less.
Yeah, no, that's valid. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share?
This is Cindy.
Go ahead.
And once I figured out what I was supposed to do, I kind of thought, well, I'm to the left of center. So I had to do some thinking. Well, it's got to be bigger than 4, but less than 4.5. And then I compared it. I thought, well, I was to the left of Haley, so I was going to smush it down a little bit. So I started to kind of do some number comparisons. But I think I'm a little bit off. So because I should be like closer to Patsy. I'm thinking.
Oh, okay. You said a lot of things that I want to pull out here. And I also see comments in the chat too. Okay, so you were saying, you mentioned a halfway mark
Right,
and you used that kind of as a benchmark
yes.
to decide where you were going to put your number.
I realized I was to the left of the middle. So I knew I had to be halfway between 4 and 5 is 4.5, 4 and 1/2. So then that told me I had to have a 4 point something.
Because you're working with 4.2. And then why did you say you should be closer to Patsy?
Well, Patsy's 4.2. We should literally be on top of each other
Why?
because we have the same number.
Oh, okay.
And
But
I was thinking, Cindy, you were probably closer to right. So I was like, oh, I should
well,
go closer to you. But you're
I was
right. We should
thinking
be
a
the
ruler.
same.
I gotta get a ruler, but maybe I'll figure it out. But
Yeah.
like I'm at that point, I was like, we were ready to go back to the main room. So then I just kind of stopped figuring out where I was supposed to be. But I also was thinking I was close to Haley. See, she's 4.25. And it's kind of comparing myself to the others. And
Oh.
yeah.
Go ahead.
But yeah, if I didn't have time to like visually divide the 4 and the 4.5 into fifths to kind of determine where I should be at.
Okay. I love it. I have like 5 directions that I want to go. And as a teacher, this happens. You're like, students say such rich things, and then you're like, okay, where do I go with this? I have a question for someone else in the group. Do others agree with Cindy's decision to put it to the left of Haley? And why? Haley put 4.25 and Cindy has 4.2. Do you agree that it should be to the left, and why? How do you know? It's smaller. So this brings in some understanding of decimals that are 1 decimal place, right? And then you have numbers that have 2 decimal places. So you have tenths and hundredths shown, but then how do you compare them, right? Like, what is that? So there can be that conversation happening. I also, okay, I'm going to look in the chat as well. 0.2 is only 20% of the way from 4 to 5. 0.25 is 25% of the way there. Susan, would you please come on and explain further what you mean by that? I love it.
Well, now I'm really nervous because I'm not a math person.
No,
and I'm talking to all the math people.
No,
Oh,
you're a
well,
math person. You're a math person. So.
Well, I'm doing some math today.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's been a long time since I studied math, but I understand that 0.2 represents 20% of 100 and 0.25 represents 25% of 100. So it's like 5% farther down the line, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of justifying going along with the comment before about it being smaller. Yes. I like it. Nice. And then my last question that I want to ask right now is why? Let's see. Nope, I changed my mind. How would we deal with equivalent numbers? So there's a couple 4.2s. What should we do with them? We could maybe stack them, use both sides of the line. I like it. Okay. I want you to go back to that link in the chat. And I am going to exit, and I want you to, if you would like to revise yours. Okay, so only worry about yours. If you would like to revise your placement based on anything we were talking about, go ahead and do so and adjust. And just in case the link got lost, there it is again. I see people in there. If you want to add a number, Katrina, go for it. I see people even adjusting the 4.3 and 4.4, which I find very interesting. Someone mentioned, I think it was Cindy mentioned fifths from 4 to 4.5, which makes me think of 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, which is where the majority of our numbers are. So even thinking about dividing up between 4 and 4.5 into fifths, what would that look like? Huh. Okay. I have one last question before we kind of call out some teacher things about this activity. Is it Marquis or Marquis?
Yes, Marky.
Marquis, would you be willing to share why did you change your number from 4.4 to 4.48?
Well, I felt like it wasn't in the right spot, but somebody else was in the spot that I wanted. And so I wasn't willing to either type or tell them or overlap them. So I just decided what the best thing I could do is change the number to be closer to 5 or closer to 4.5.
So you're looking at the spacing of numbers, thinking that the fifths here, like 4.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe the 4.48 then would be your marker would be closer to 4.5 than 4.4.
Yep.
I said that very confusingly,
No,
but
it makes sense. I'm here like, I don't know, it's fun. I'm kind of laughing like it's a silly thing to do, but I don't know, it made sense to me. So
no. I actually I love that you did that, because what it does is it's showing, like, if your student did that, it's showing that your student is thinking about the spacing on the number line, because whatever our scale is on the number line, we want that to stay consistent. So how are we going to place the numbers so that like if they are all tenths, right, from like 4.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them are evenly spaced. And so because I said move yours, but you said you didn't want to take over someone's spot, you adjusted your number to reflect the spacing. So that shows a lot of number sense, right? And those kinds of things we want to pull out from students. And I see, Katrina, you put 4.6, right? Kind of estimating, well, the tenths, or yeah, where would that be? 4.6 after 4.5. I love it. So thank you for participating. It was a little bit clunky because it's the first time that many of us, or maybe all of us, are doing it. But that is true of any routine. The more you do it in a class, the more everybody gets used to the mechanics of it. And then the focus becomes more and more on the math, right? So this is the routine where you create the number line. You have students then move their number. You have a discussion. Okay, why did you put your number there? How do you know? What benchmarks did you use? What about the spacing of the numbers? Do we want to move anything, moving to that revise? Okay, now that there are other numbers on the line, now what? looking at the ruler at the top of the screen to use as a guide, that's awesome because that's using tools, right? Like what tools do I have available? That's mathematical thinking. So this is the routine. And I did this up north for a regional presentation. And this was a picture that we took of the number line there. So it was the same activity, but it was on paper, right? So it wasn't online. And some people wrote their names, but by writing your names, it's like taking attendance, right? So it's a routine that you can do in your classroom to take attendance, but let's make it mathy. And then you have a conversation about it. People can get up, move their Post-its. So it can be really fun. And you don't have to do whole numbers. You could change it up depending on what you're doing. Like you could have 2.5 and 3 3/4. You could mix it up 40% and 4/5, right? So now there's different representations of numbers. Money. You could have larger values of money. You could have really small increments of decimal places, right? There's only 1/100th of a difference between these two, but there are infinite amount of decimals that are between these two numbers, but they look super close together. So maybe we're talking in my class about decimal places to the thousands. And so being able to pull that knowledge out as well. So some teacher notes about this. It's going to look different in your class. And if you have a range of students coming, it's great to have ways that you might push students who might feel more comfortable with number lines than others. I love that someone put 5, and I love that your reason for putting 5 was that what was the word you used? It was more comfortable for you because you knew where it went. Okay, and I love that because that's very valid, and many students are in that boat. I want to be able to put a number on the number line that I know it's going to be correct, right? Like that's very important for students to feel like I can do this. And if it's a routine, they might become more comfortable with challenging themselves later on. But all the numbers within the range, if it's within the range, are valid. So creating a number that others might not create is something that you could tell a student to kind of push them. Well, let's think of something that you think no one else will think of. Or can you place this number on the number line? For this specific example between 4 and 5, maybe I could say, where would 1.5 pi be, right? Because pi is 3.14, so that's not even on this section. But 1.5 pi, where would that be? That's more of a challenging problem. Or if it's a number line that only has whole numbers, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because you're only working on whole numbers, then maybe you're giving decimals to some students to place, or improper fractions. You know your students and what would be a challenge. And then here are some questions. Some of these I asked. You might have a couple go-to that you find that you want to use with your routine. How'd you choose your number? How'd you figure out where to place it? Which benchmarks were helpful? This is really important. And I know Cindy was talking about that halfway mark, because that kind of thinking in our students is very powerful, and they probably do it without even realizing it, but that's very strategic math thinking to say, what do I know? And so then I will adjust based on that. So thinking about benchmarks like half or quarters, and then making those adjustments. How do you determine the spacing? Are they spaced correctly? How do you know? Do you see relationships between the numbers? What are we going to do with these equivalent numbers? If someone has a percent and someone has a fraction, you could do that. So students might come up with different ways of representing numbers, not only decimals. So you will get this slide deck, so you'll have these questions to choose from. But I have a couple reflection questions, because as is, this may not be something that you will be able to just take and use in your classroom. So couple questions. The first one is, how is this a low floor, meaning many entry points, high ceiling, meaning students could be challenged, task? How is this a low floor, high ceiling task that you could use with multi-level students. If you're willing to unmute, that'd be awesome. How does this lend itself to a multi-level classroom? And I guess I probably answered it, which is maybe why people aren't talking, that students can choose what number that they want, that they're comfortable with. So there's that entry point of, I see 5 on the number line, I'm going to put 5. And we want to be able to create that opportunity for students to do something that they feel good about. And also being able to challenge students to come up with numbers that maybe others wouldn't think about, and place those on the number line. So it really does accommodate many different levels, and which kind of goes to the one-room schoolhouse setting. Any ideas on how this could be done if you didn't have a classroom? Like, how could you adapt this routine? Any ideas? I know some people were thinking, or said that they have one-room schoolhouse settings. Did anything stick out at you on how you could maybe use this? The number line could be on the wall and students can add anytime they are there. This doesn't have to be live. This could be done over the course of a week, over the course of several weeks, where when they're there, they see the number line, they put a Post-it on it, and then maybe there's a certain time of, maybe you have a couple on there to start with, so that the first student would have more to look at. But having that conversation with the student about, okay, now where would you move anything? Why did you place it there? Do you think these numbers are spaced correctly? And then as more and more get added, you could have those questions posted. Students could maybe have to fill in a sentence frame to respond to a Post-it that wasn't theirs. So you don't have to do it live or with a large group. It could be something static that is a staple in the room, and the number line just changes every week or every 2 weeks. So, and it can be done paper, it could be done online, could be a nice break. I see, even if students are working on different subject areas, pulling students together, right? Teacher could jumble them and students have to sort them out, right? You could give them numbers and then they could have to place them. Yeah, I love that. So there's different ways of doing it, but if it's something that's done every week, every 2 weeks, you're building this number sense because you can control, like, what are my parameters? And I could be highlighting different kinds of numbers. So I pulled out, like, where are number lines in the math standards, and whole numbers, time intervals, fractions, decimals, inequalities, the coordinate plane, dot plots, histograms, box plots, negative numbers, absolute value, representing addition and subtraction of rational numbers, approximating irrational numbers, having double number lines to talk about proportionality. Number lines are talked about a lot in the standards, so with all different types of numbers. And I think that, so I think it's well worth our time in incorporating a routine like this, and take attendance that way. So at this point, Gail is going to put a link to a worksheet in the chat, and it's going to look like you're going to have to click make a copy. So I hope it works for everybody. If it doesn't, let me know. But you'll make a copy so it's yours. No one else will see this. You will get to type on it. And I want you to think about just this first page on taking attendance, and think through, like, were there any academic vocabulary words that stood out to me, whether it was in conversation, directions on the page, that I might want to focus on in instruction with students. Math practices, what math practices were students engaging with? You can look up what like the descriptions are, or you can make your best judgment based on the title for right now of these math practices. What reading, writing, speaking, listening are students engaging with? And how might this be adapted for you? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to individually just kind of jot down some notes to think about how different content areas are coming together and how it would be useful for you. So I'll be quiet for a few minutes. And if you have problems opening it, let me know. Take about 2 more minutes to write down some thoughts for yourself. All right, if you want to come back to the Zoom screen, you will get to revisit that page. So leave it up. You'll get to revisit that document. Again, no one can see it but you. And I will highlight some reading, writing, speaking, listening standards that I found connections to. I will highlight those at the end, but for now, I want it to just kind of sit, like whatever notes you wrote, whether it was in standard notation or just notes, like it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna let you like leave that to the side for now. But I think those are good questions to be thinking about, right? Especially if we don't have a math class, like, okay, math is super important. Numeracy skills, being literate, being numerate is super important. And what other things am I also accomplishing by using these routines? So leave that up, but come back to the Zoom. we're going to move to our second routine and about talking about the weather. And I'm actually going to have you jump right into a breakout room in just a moment. So I am going to explain it here, and then I'll have you open the link. So in your groups, you're going to see a screen that looks like this, where you're going to plot data on a Google slide. Okay, and I've given you data. You're going to plot the data. And then on the next slide, there are some questions. You can answer all of them. You can answer some of them. Okay, but at least look at those questions and think, how would I respond? And so that's the main activity, are these first two slides. If you have time, there's additional slides with questions that you can look at. If you don't have time, no big deal. When you open it, it will again ask you to make a copy. And so it will be just for your, just for you. And the points down here, I've already given you things that basically you can drag and drop. So when you open it, there are points at the bottom left. You can drag them where you want them to be. And I have tick marks for you to create a scale on this y-axis. How high do I put it, right? And so there are tick marks here for you to drag and drop as well. So you will all be able to open the document. So you can all click on that link that Gail just put in the chat. In your breakout rooms, because you'll all be having like your worksheet, right? This is like your worksheet. In your breakout rooms, I encourage you to unmute and turn on your camera and talk to each other. How are we going to do this? But everybody will have their own paper, right? Like you'll be able to kind of record your own stuff. No one will be able to see it, but talk about how are we going to graph this data. So slide 1 is most important, then slide 2. If you have time, you can look at the other slides. You'll have about a little over 10 minutes. So we can pause the recording. All right, so I'm going to put a question in the chat. How did your group decide how many tick marks to use? And if you want to unmute and share, you can. Give you a moment if you're typing. We determined that there were approximately 25 degrees from, oops, I lost it, from min to max, then decided to make a tick mark every 5 degrees, resulted in 6 marks. We wanted tick marks at the tens places, beginning with the 1 below and the 1 above our data range. So 5 marks at 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80. Okay, so this conversation, 5 marks and then 6 marks. So you can see people, your groups did it differently, which is great. And that happens, right? And that can be a very rich conversation to have on how did you decide how to graph them. So if you went up by tens and you started and had 7 marks, then this could be what the shape of the graph might look like. If you went up by 5s and just kind of like marked that, okay, we're not really starting with 0, but I wanted places to then go up by 5s, maybe this is what the data distribution could look like, right? Yours might look different, differently depending on how you did it, how you described it in the chat. So a really rich then conversation you could have if you are doing this again live with a group and you have students breaking off and doing this, or if you do this over the course of a week, right? Where if it's a one-room schoolhouse, you're collecting graphs and then you're choosing some, you could then create a comparison where you put data you put 2 graphs side by side and you create a notice and wonder out of this. asking two questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder when looking at these? So I'm going to ask you that question. Looking at the screen, what do you notice about these graphs? And is there anything you wonder? Feel free to put some responses in the chat. What do you notice? What do you wonder? I wonder if starting at 0 would have been a more accurate representation. You can then have the conversation about accurate and accurately representing data. Using a more compressed range on the vertical axis exaggerates the swings. Yes, so the scale has changed, so the increases and decreases look different. So you're noticing the same things. Would people realize that there's a different starting point? And that all of these are excellent questions because it gives students an opportunity to discover things and to bring out exactly what you're talking about. Oh, the data looks more compressed on the left screen, the left graph, and it's more spread out or vertically spread out on the right. And how does that change? Does it mean, is the data accurately represented? What does that even mean to accurately represent data? Realizing that there are different starting points, right? Are they both starting at 0 or not? One's going up by 10s, one's going up by 5s with a break in the axes. But it's actually the same data. And that might be something that someone notices as well. Wow, we all started with the same data. Our graphs look very different. And this kind of graphic literacy and skill is super important because in the news all over the place, we are seeing data represented and someone is deciding how they're going to represent that data to us, usually because they want us to see it a certain way. I, as a reader of that data, want to be able to notice these kinds of things. Oh, it looks like such a drastic decrease because the scale that they're using. Maybe the data isn't as spread out as they're making it appear, right? And so being able to kind of start to critically think about how data is represented is a really important skill. And, you know, with, I'm gonna look at this handout that you will get a link to. I'm gonna highlight a few things on the screen here. You will get a version that you can edit. So I give you a table that's blank. You can fill it in according to where you are, what week it is. There are not tick marks on the axis, the y-axis. If you wanted to provide an adaptation for some students, you could give them an already created axis. You could already scale it for them and then still have them work with the same data, reflect on the same questions as everyone else, whether it's over the course of days in a one-room schoolhouse setting or in a classroom setting, but you might provide an additional support of not having them create the scale at first. But there's a blank version here for you. And then there are some questions, and these questions, you don't have to use all these questions. You could cherry pick, right? Like what makes sense for my context? Talking about like, what's the mean temperature? What's the average daily temperature? What was the median daily temperature? What's the mode? What was the range? And this question, I think, is one of the most important of all of them. If I am able to find two, the range, the average, or the median and the average, whatever I'm focusing on, or all three, can I answer what data point is the best summary of what the weather was typically like? And this starts to get into another part of analyzing and interpreting data of maybe the average isn't the best number if there were big outliers, right? One way or the other, low or high. And that can be true of money. You know, we hear with money talking about median, the median income, median salary, median, like what does that even mean? And is that a better representation than the average? Why not? Having those kinds of conversations is helpful. And so I'm thinking of like the Excel class. Someone in here teaches Excel. Maybe you're creating a graph on or data points on Excel. Maybe they're calculating an average and they're calculating a range, and then just adding one additional question. Maybe you already do this, adding a question about like which point would you say, which data point that you found is the best summary of this data? Why would you say that? So that students are then engaging with the content critically and interpreting it. There are some other reflection questions that you could cherry pick from. What was the highest temperature? This could be more conversational if it's a lower level English class that you're teaching, or if you're working with English speakers of other languages. So what was the highest temperature? Providing a sentence frame. The highest temperature last week was blank degrees Fahrenheit. The lowest temperature, a sentence frame for a response. Talking about the difference between highest and lowest temperature, which gets at that range, right? And then you can attach that word range to it. You could work on estimating about how many degrees was it on such and such day. Bring in the number line again. Where would 59 degrees be on this number line? Here's 0. Where would you put it? And then a follow-up question, you could say, okay, like, then where would 29 degrees be? If you placed 59 here, where would you place 29? So then bringing in that number sense, similar to the clothesline math that we did at the beginning of placing numbers. You could, you know, it's Minnesota. We can talk about negative weather. So how many degrees to 0 from 29? 29 degrees. What if it was negative 29 degrees? Where would that be? And how many degrees to 0 is it? Starting to bring in the idea of absolute value being a distance on a number line, opposites, right? And 59 and negative 59 degrees could work in Minnesota. Like 4 or 5 years ago, the polar vortex that happened, it felt like negative 59 degrees. So, but the idea is, where would this be on the number line? Where would its opposite be? Where would the negative be? And how far is each to 0? Kind of having that conversation. So you don't have to do all of these, but these are just options. You know your students, you know what students might need to work on. These questions are really geared towards several questions on the, or areas on like high school equivalency exams that are really important and that can be very confusing for students. Negative numbers, absolute value, opposites, these words, getting them confused, average, median, range, mode. What does that mean? What do these numbers mean? And so these kinds of questions that we do, reading graphs, right? Creating graphs, all of this is incredibly important for becoming more comfortable with these kinds of questions. And it also does help in their everyday consuming of news and whatnot. So these are just some ideas. Again, you can take and leave certain parts of it. There are a lot of similar standards that we've already talked about with the taking attendance. The only one that I added for this is this one really does give us a chance to interpret data in that first quadrant with a real world context directly out of the standards. Okay, I am going to give you a moment to go back to that document and take like a couple minutes to look at this document. It's also in the chat again, but if you have it open, then you'll have your notes from the previous one as well, because you all made your own copy. If you go to the second page talking about the weather, I encourage you to take some notes. What pieces of this do you want to take away? So maybe starting with that last box. What would be helpful for your students? What do you see being useful in your setting? And if time, think about what other aspects are included in that routine. Give you a few minutes to think about what you might want to take away from this one. Take another minute to jot down some notes. You can always come back to this later because it's now in your drive if you were able to open it. And if not, let me know. All right, if you can navigate back to the Zoom presentation, I have one more that I want to share with you, and we're not going to be able to experience it in depth as a student, but I want to share it with you because I think it's really powerful. So my first question is, how many of you are familiar with slow reveal graphs? If you could put in the chat yes or no, just so that I'm aware of how much we already know about slow reveal graphs. Anybody aware of them? Ooh, I'm excited. I love sharing new things with people. And again, sometimes when we go to, not sometimes, I think all the time, when we go to webinars and we go to trainings and all that, it's like there's so many different resources. And I would say we're not expected to do them all, right? Like of these three, you might say like this routine is going to work best with my students, or something that I want to do right now with my students. I'm not going to do all of them. And within that routine, maybe there's a piece that you're going to focus on, right? We can't do it all, but giving options. So someone showed this to me once and I thought it was amazing. So I'm going to let you kind of quickly experience what a slow reveal graph is, and then I'll show you a resource on where you can find more. So here is a graph. In the chat, what do you notice? What do you wonder? Anything that you notice or anything that you wonder can be anything. Give you a moment to type. And maybe you're putting this in the chat already, but I notice, okay, there's an orange line and there's a black line. That's what I see. Things look stable for a long while, then yikes. Okay, so looks like heartbeats. So there's so many different things that you could say, right? All right. So I might ask that question to students, and I might say, okay, what do you make sense of what's happening with the orange and the black lines towards the right side of the graph? Like what's happening over here? And I might call attention to that. Okay, now there's new information. Now, what do you think? How does this new information change what you're thinking about the graph? All of a sudden we have years. So maybe I'm adjusting my thinking now because of that. And if you want to put something in the chat, please do. I'm going to keep clicking, but now we have years. And so maybe we're asking these questions. Okay, how does that change what's happening towards the right side of the graph? Okay, we have questions coming in. What happened in 2021? All of a sudden, I'm interested. I'm like, okay, now there's years. So what happened in 2021? Okay, maybe it's climate change. What do we think it might be about? We're predicting based on information we're given. Okay, so now we see live births. Okay, how does that change what we're thinking? What do we think the black line might represent? Remote workplaces? Deaths? Yeah, in 2021, I feel like that the remote workplaces, that's a good guess. Climate change, great guess, right? And now that we know live births, maybe the black line is talking about deaths, right? And there it is, okay? What does this striped region represent? We could ask students that. Now we have a title, okay? We have a sentence here. Births tend to increase in summer months. Overall birth rate and total births have decreased over the years. Okay, I can take in that statement. I can think about that. Does that align with things that I notice or wonder, or that I did earlier? Okay, there's another sentence that's part of this graph. Despite the seasonal offsets of more births in summer and more deaths in winter, births outnumber deaths significantly over the years, but the difference is getting smaller. I can stop and reflect on that statement. Does that align with things that we noticed and wondered earlier? Again, if we were having this as a discussion, or if you were having students interact with this individually, but in a much slower pace than what we're doing now. Here's another sentence. Deaths tend to increase during the winter months. Overall, the mortality rate has decreased, but an increasing population means has still meant more total deaths. Baby boomers are moving through the timeline. Fewer people to have babies, more elders dying. So lots of things that we can notice and wonder. And we're kind of pausing after each new piece of information to kind of check in. Okay, now what are we thinking? Does this match what we were thinking earlier? And then there's this question over here. Okay, what do we think accounted for this 4-month period? What might we say from December 2020 peaking in January 21? Yes, exactly, right? Like this is very real and very recent. Everybody would be able to say, wow, yep. And the way this graph is presented, that is very alarming to see that big of a jump. So this is the graph. And if we were to give, for myself even, if I were to look at this graph right away, my initial response would have been like, whew, that's a lot of information for me to take in. Slow reveal is literally revealing piece by piece the information, the different layers, so that students can interact with different pieces of information here. And one part that I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over, where this axis of numbers, right, in the 100,000. So we have kind of an idea of the scale of what the lines mean. So with that, after doing an activity like this, you could have students reflect using sentence frames. Okay, and so I'm going to encourage you to actually choose one of these and type something in the chat. When I first looked at this graph, I thought that very one where it was just the orange and the black lines. And you could respond to that. Or one thing about the graph that was easy for me was, or one thing that was challenging. I was really lost when, or once I understood that, then I felt the most important piece of information on this graph is blank. Next time when working with graphs, I'll make sure to blank. So choose one of these and fill it in the chat. Some might be more relevant than others because we went through this very quickly, but if there is one that resonates. Yes, there's so much language acquisition, language practice embedded in this kind of routine. And so many different subject areas have graphs that we really need to look at. Next time when working with graphs, I'll be sure to take my time. Yes, one thing I found challenging was figuring out what the shaded area between the lines meant. Was it cosmetic? Was it significant? I love that. The only thing, that I thought of was like, okay, it's kind of really helping me see the range of it, but there might be more. I was really lost when there wasn't much information. Yes, thank you so much for adding your questions, like what we were thinking about and wondering about during the process. So this, again, these are things, this is like what we could give to our students. And if we have students who might not be ready for this language, maybe we give them sentence frames like this. First, I saw, this was easy for me. This was hard for me. This confused me. This part helped me to understand. Next time I want to, right? So it can be a little bit more simple sentence frames, but it gets at the same ideas. So it's just a suggestion, but you can certainly adapt it or add to it as well. But giving everybody a chance to write or to speak with and reflect on what they saw. So, and I also would probably use that routine if students, you can push back on this. I have not taught ESL classes, so please push back if this is not a fair statement. I would probably choose a graph that doesn't have as much written extra text. So maybe something like this, where you have students kind of see a progression of bar graphs, but there isn't a lot of extra text on the graph. And I chose this one as a second example. I'm just kind of scrolling through because of, it was just Halloween. Maybe we were eating candy, but kind of looking at this. And then I love that there's like an extra layer of, oh my gosh, they're also graphing an additional part of this graph, but I don't have to look at it all as at once. So thank you for saying that. Yes, I do have this. So slowrevealgraphs.com, and you're going to get the slides that have this in it. You can literally scroll for a lot of different graphs here. They're already all made. And if I were to click on one, then you can find the slide deck. It's all already made for you. So you can choose one, a type of graph maybe that you want students to interact with, but they've already done all of the language for you. And so that you can do a slow reveal. So that is a resource for you to use. And then I encourage you to add something like, oh my gosh, where am I? Here we go. I encourage you to add something like these sentence stems to have students really reflect. Good. I am so glad that that seems like a useful site. So again, pulling out the ones in black are additional standards I found that could be in a routine like this, depending on the graph, talking about proportionality, independent and dependent variables, bar graphs specifically. So there's lots of math standards here. And I did, for reference, pull out ones that I think you could make a connection to, depending on how, like specific standards, depending on how you're presenting it and how you're embedding it within the rest of your instruction. I do think that there's opportunities for Anchor 1 and Anchor 7 of reading. And writing, depending on how you're having them reflect, producing clear and coherent writing, maybe giving them paragraph frames or sentence frames, but is it appropriate to task, purpose, and audience? Some language ones, you demonstrating the command of the conventions of standard English, general academic and domain specific words, using them accurately, right? Participating in a range of conversations, building on others' ideas, what someone else is saying, whether it is in real time or whether it is you are interacting in a from day to day on paper or something. So we don't have time to reflect, but you do have that worksheet. Same questions, like how would I use this in my classroom? So I am very curious if there's anything, you don't have to answer both of these, but in the chat, if you would be able to let me know kind of like, what's one thing that you want to do with your students? What are 2 takeaways, or what are questions you have? If you could take a moment to kind of think like, what am I overall wanting to walk away with from this webinar? What stood out to me? What questions do I have? If you could put that in the chat, that would be awesome. And as you're finishing that, there are some upcoming webinars we want you to be aware of. So there, Gail just put registration for a webinar coming up on the 15th. If you are an administrator or a program leader, it makes sense for you to be there. If you're a teacher, it makes sense for you to be there. You can also share it with your administrator or program leader as well, talking about numeracy instruction in our programs. And then for the other webinars that are coming up, registration information, you will be alerted to that by signing up for that newsletter if you have not already. So the information for these events is in the chat. And I just want to call out, I know we have to go, I just want to call out a few of the takeaways here, why math routines are important, how to make them fun and engaging, as well as build off of them. Yes, to suit a non-math class. Want to do the number line attendance with students. I've been really fired up to do more notice wonder activities at the beginning of my workshops to really set the tone, get people thinking mathematically. Attendance taking activity was perfect. Great reminder about the use of number lines at low and high levels. And the reveal graphs look like a possibility too. I'm glad that there were some things you can pull out, right? And you might have to adapt it for your setting because we all have different settings, but I'm glad that some of this was useful. So thank you so much. Please reach out with questions. If you do something in your class, I also would love to hear about it. So how it went. So please email me. But thank you so much for being here.